I'm going to do some housekeeping while everyone's starting to join up, and we're going to start this webinar here in the next few seconds. If you do have any questions for myself, Scott, or Carlos, or even Jeannie, she worked with me at the storage group, we will be here to answer those. Please put them in the Q&A. We are going to go live after this presentation, this webinar, to answer as many questions as time allows, and we might put a few in the questions in the presentation if it goes along with what we're talking about. So I'm going to give it 30 more seconds, allow a few more people to join, and then we can get going. All right. So let's get started here. It's 2:03. I think those that are joining have joined now. I hope you all can hear me, can see me. Carlos, Scott, can you please just test yourself real quick here as we move forward?
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
I hope you can hear us.
Perfect. I can hear you guys. I'm sure they'll let us know if they can't hear us. But thank you for joining us for our first webinar of fall 2023. I'm so excited that you're here. And this is titled Unmanned Facilities, Online Leasing, and Contactless Rentals. Oh my. I have a lot of attendees that signed up for this, so I'm hoping this topic is very helpful and very useful for you all. So let's get started here. All right, let me see if my slides will go. So about myself, I feel weird talking about myself, but I am the marketing manager here at the storage group. I have probably good 10 years of marketing experience. I'm a very diverse background. I've came from construction and higher education, and now I'm in self-storage. So I have a very unique background in that. I'm very customer service focused. I do have a background in hospitality at Disney World. So if I do point at this presentation, you might see that Disney point, and I might bring out some Disney verbiage here. So I bring a little bit of the fun to it, I guess. And next we will go to Carlos, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, well, welcome. And I'm Carlos Kaslo, and I've been around the self-storage industry for roughly 4 decades, and started a publication called the Self-Storage Legal Review, which is still in publication 35 years later, and former general counsel for the Self-Storage Association. I know 2 things. The law of self-storage operations, and a lot about self-storage insurance and tenant insurance. Scott knows more than me.
Hey, everyone. Scott Zucker, also a self-storage lawyer, if you can believe that. Although I'm a little jealous of Ashlee. I'd like to know what cast character she was at Disney, but we can find that out during our webinar. We are, myself along with Carlos, are founders of the Self-Storage Legal Network, which is a subscription service available to the Self-Storage Association members and its affiliate members through the state associations. As you'll learn more today, proud contributors to Storage Lease Now, the product available through the storage group for operators around the country.
Thank you, Scott. All right, so I'll just do a quick run through of the agenda. It might deviate a little bit from this just because I want to keep this an open conversation and really get this information for you. I will do a brief overview of the storage group and Storage Lease Now. It's a great partnership, and it's a part of our suite that we have. And then we'll go into the meat of it, the nitty gritty, why you should be unmanned. And Scott and Carlos are the experts in everything legal about this. So I'm going to give it over to them once we get to that point, and they will give you an abundance of information. And we're really excited that we can put this together for you all and put all of our expertise together. Right. So as you know, I work for the storage group. I am the marketing manager here. So I can be a little salesy and everything like that. But I do want to start this off with the storage group. We are a website and marketing software solution company. We do everything from progressive website design. We do development, digital marketing, and advertising, such as SEO, PPC, social media, blogs. There's a couple of us within our marketing department. And as you all may know, it's a big beast. So we take that on for you. So definitely reach out if you do have any questions about that. We do have the Click and Store online rental suite. It is the original. It has been out there for, I think, about 11, 12 years now. It basically is what I call the Amazon of self-storage. So it makes you able to be unmanned. So we thought this was a really great collaboration with Scott and Carlos and Storage Lease, now part of our suite, to bring out this information for you. And then Storage Lease Now. This is a partnership, and it's within our services of our suites. Essentially, I like to keep it simple. So you can get a custom state compliant rental agreement and within 4 clicks. And it makes it where it's very simple to go unmanned, developed by lawyers. Hello, Scott and Carlos. And it's for the self-storage owners and operators. You can secure it and do it within 4 clicks, like I mentioned. They do have it for each state. So it's a fantastic suite tool that we do have. So we hope that you kind of got great information about what we do. And now let's get into the nitty-gritty of our main point of the webinar. But, you know, I won't miss out a chance to put a little spin on what we do. So, so give us a call about Storage Group or Storage Lease Now. So.
Thanks, Ashley. Yeah, we're really excited to participate today in this this webinar on a topic that Carlos and I get a lot of questions on, and certainly in the last year, 2 years, maybe even as COVID took over a lot of the facilities and we moved to enhancing operations from an unmanned perspective. You know, this issue became greater and greater for operators around the country. In fact, it sort of dovetails into our relationship with the Storage Group and the creation of Storage Lease Now, because part of the reality of an unmanned, virtual, electronic, remote facility, whatever you may choose to call it, is the ability to create your contract remotely, virtually, and we'll talk more about the lease aspect of it in a couple minutes. We wanted to just basically have a conversation with you about the ever-growing interest in unmanned virtual remote properties from a legal perspective. Why having an unmanned property as compared to what might conventionally have been your manned or managed property is a shift in operations, but also from a legal perspective, completely appropriate if you take certain actions to provide what I would call replacement services for what might otherwise be the manager at your facility. And let me just, you know, look, the issue about cost effectiveness of replacing an employee with technology is something that each of you as operators would look at and decide for yourself in terms of cost effectiveness. I mean, the reality of wages and the pressure on wages and benefits is a reality in this industry and in all industries. So it's something certainly that may be number one on your list to address, and certainly technology can reduce your costs. And you know, certainly the aspect of 24/7 access is available through technology. The last one I'll talk about, and then Carlos will get into the others a little bit, is this issue of security. It is very important for me to stress for you as operators that if you move to unmanned properties and you lose that manager on the facility, you still have a level of responsibility of what I would call ordinary care to your tenants and invitees to make sure that the property is safe and secure. So if you had a manager on site that was otherwise available in case something happened or something was needed by your tenants, you're going to have to replace that with cameras and other technology that would allow you to basically be there virtually, right? We're just trying to create a substitution or replacement for what would be the manned or managed property. So the concept of security is important to me. You do not, because you become virtual, you cannot have, you know, you can't leave that responsibility out of the equation for you when you move to an unmanned property. Carlos, some additional thoughts on this list?
Yeah, I think the real the answer to why Unmanned is perhaps out of necessity. And I say that because the unstaffed facility is not a binary, it's a continuum. And one of the issues that, I hear a lot about from operators is the difficulty of actually finding employees for their facility. And we've been in a transition period for quite a long time, where we had a model, and the model was a management team, an apartment, and an office. And that's been breaking down for quite a while. Probably 15 years ago, people started to question the necessity of a management team and people who live on site. And now we're in a period where that is actually accelerating, where fewer facilities are being built with apartments for people to live in. And the staffing challenges create a necessity for the use of technology. And if you're staffing a facility with one person, you're going to have technology around that person so that you can staff the facility and essentially rent to customers in a normal business day, because a single person can't work more than 8 hours a day and things like that and be effective. So it's just going to be more challenging because of demographics and the difficulty of hiring people. And technology can play a role with a facility with an office, or it can actually take over the entire rental process completely, and you can have unstaffed facilities. But just realize that there are forces out there that have moved us in that direction, and it may not be the way we necessarily wanted to go.
I know, Carlos, you and I have talked about this reduced human error aspect when it comes to an unmanned property, and you're working through these documentation of this exercise of becoming a tenant virtually or remotely. And I know you've found a lot of value from the legal perspective of taking the conversation away from a manager with a prospective customer and having it just be an online transaction or virtual transaction. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, that's a good point, Scott. And it actually eliminates one issue that is, kind of plagued the industry on the legal side, especially when things go wrong for a tenant. And that is, the manager told me that there was some kind of oral assertion or promise by the manager with respect to, this thing has a release of liability. Do I have to worry about that? Oh, don't worry about it. We never enforce it. These kind of conversations that supposedly, have taken place at the facility, which probably didn't. But we have this issue of sort of that conversation upon which the tenant relied on, and allegations of fraud in the inception and all this type of thing. These are legal ways that plaintiffs use to get around your rental agreement, to be honest. But if you have the transaction taking place online, that can't happen. You control the entire script. You have to be careful in how you set up your script, and you don't want to make statements that can be, because everything you have on that website can be used against you. So you have to be very careful on how you set things up, and the things that you say about the facility. And you may want to refrain from having 24/7 monitored video. Might not be the best thing to have on your website.
Unless you have somebody sitting there monitoring your video 24/7, which we know you don't, but
yeah. But even if you were doing that, I would probably suggest that we put it in different terms, that maybe that's not the best way to phrase something like that. But anyway, just be aware that you now have a much greater control over the tenant interaction, because the automated process eliminates the human factor. And but it also takes away from the human factor, because there are so many situations where managers can calm tenants down and make problems kind of lower the temperature of problems. And unless you have made, and we'll talk about this later, thought in terms of customer service, how are you going to deal with those problems that come up, which good managers were very good at dealing with.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that in a second in customer service. Let me just cover automation just for a minute, because I know you and I have talked a lot about the value of the automation in the technology, especially when it comes again to the execution of the rental agreement. We know that many times under state law, the rental agreements have initial blocks that need to be filled out, and certainly ultimately need to be executed by the tenant or consented or approved by the tenant. And we found in manual leases, the relationship between the manager and the tenant live, sometimes those initial blocks are not signed. Sometimes the lease itself may be overlooked to be signed.
Maybe we should move the slide forward to the rental agreement.
Well, we'll come to that in a second, but generally in terms of these issues, we know why automation is helpful is because we know that sometimes the transaction can't be completed. The system won't let the agreement be approved until all these boxes are checked and the lease is executed. I mean, do you agree that that's sort of the advantage also of the automation and technology?
Yeah, I think automation can lower the incidence of error when during the rental process. However, I don't think it eliminates the presence of error in the rental process, because technology will have its own mistakes that can have effect. But I think that the type of error will change, and it is probably an improvement over a manual system of contracting.
So let's just go to the next slide, because I think the issue that we wanted just to address for a second on customer service is something you brought up before, and we just got a question in the chat that goes to this issue of customer service. Here's the question: for unmanned remote managed sites, where do tenants go to report damage or issues in a timely manner, and how are those incidents recorded for claims to be validated? So let's talk about customer service.
Well, if you haven't answered that question, you're not ready to have an unmanned, an unstaffed facility, because that's a central question. How are you it's really, that's an operational. How is the operator going to deal with those issues?
Right. And your suggestion would be to replace.
Yeah, but think about it long or hard, because I don't operate a self-storage facility.
Well, what we're looking for is I think this issue about reporting damages or validating that damage occurs all goes with my philosophy of trying to replace the managed aspect of a facility. So, for example, posting signs that have a phone number for tenants to call and a call center to respond to those calls if a tenant needs you. If no one is there for the owner at the facility, with a property manager or a manager at the facility, I think there has to be proper posting of signs to allow the tenant to somehow contact somebody about something that happens. And now the validation of these claims, damage that happens on property or behavior that happens on the property, to me, it all goes now down to the cameras. That if you're not going to have a manned facility.
So you're going to have this highly automated facility, but you're going to depend on signs. I mean, doesn't the technology already provide a lot of this thing where there's an instant way when I become a customer to contact whoever? I mean, all of that should be thought through and integrated into the technology that I'm using to operate this facility. I mean, signs are fine, and I don't have a problem with them because some of the older methods are really great. But that contact, who do I contact? How do I contact? Is it a telephone interaction? Is it an online, is it a Zoom interaction? Am I talking to people? All of these things, that's why I think it's incumbent on the operator to think about, how am I going to use automation to provide the customer service that live staff used to do. And I think it's a challenge, because you don't want somebody just wandering around locked in your facility without any way to contact anyone.
And we just got a good comment in the chat is, a call center is not boots on the ground to look for roof leaks or burglary claims and helping with general issues at the facility. So again, I think it's an excellent point. You know, the shift to an unmanned or unmanaged property does not replace the obligation for the facility owner and operator to maintain their property. So this obligation of regular maintenance, regular checking, all the things that you typically would do to protect and maintain your property doesn't go away because you don't have a manager on site. In fact, from a point of view of liability, it may be enhanced that you have more regular checks at your property to make sure that it's safe and secure for your property, for your tenant.
Scott, I talked to an operator recently who was moving towards one of their facilities, actually moving towards an unmanned model. And one of the things that they said to me was, we may not have staffing at the facility, but we still have to provide customer service. And figuring out how we do that in a way that is as good or better than what we were able to do with people in the office is the real challenge of going unstaffed.
So let's shift for a minute from customer service to this e-commerce point. I mean, scalability is sort of speaks for itself in terms of technology, but we've talked about the transaction world doing kiosks, credit card payments, mobile, PayPal, aspects of transactions, purchasing insurance, all the things that happen in terms of payment transaction between the manager of the facility and the tenant. How are those changed by a manned versus unmanned facility?
That is that we are, what it does is it changes where. Again, it's not a transaction that takes on a counter with somebody across from that counter that takes us through the transaction. It moves it to our computer, our iPad, our telephone, and again, but a methodology that takes you through each of the steps that you want your customer to do. And with the self-storage rental, the primary e-commerce decision is the rental of the storage unit. That's where everything flows from. And having a system that allows a tenant to rent online, but also rent online efficiently. Our patience on a phone is probably less when we're chatting with a manager at a counter. And so you really do have to have a system that works efficiently, but also realize that there is a regulatory structure for these type of transactions. There is federal law, the e-sign agreement. We've got state law. UETA, I think is what it's called too, the Uniform Electronic Transaction Act. We have this legal infrastructure, but I think we also have a growing e-commerce structure. And so I don't think that there are a lot of vendors and a lot of support out there to take you into e-commerce. But again, it's not just, I think I'd like to have an unstaffed facility. It's really thinking through the process and not just the rental of the storage space. What other services are you buying? And Scott mentioned one that is sort of ubiquitous in our industry, and that's the, taking the customer through the tenant insurance option or the protection plan option, whatever you're offering. So there's a lot of moving parts to the, to that transaction, and yet they have to be done in a way that customers, find customer friendly, that they can go through efficiently and not keep having to back click and go through things multiple times.
So let's talk about one last aspect of e-commerce before we talk about the rental agreements themselves and the online methodology of an online agreement, is the challenge over cash versus credit or debit or ACH payments. We've seen jurisdictions, both cities and states, incorporate these cash laws that would prohibit companies from refusing cash for transactions. And we know that some of these, or most of these, may not even apply to self-storage facilities because of the non-retail nature of a self-storage business, that being the rental of the space between the landlord and the tenant. But you sense that there's a a cash stress point out there, don't you?
You it's a funny thing because there is a significant cash payer in our industry. I mean, it's just one of those artifacts that actually exists. But if you have a completely automated facility and you're renting simply online, you're not going to have to, the law is not going to force you into, into having somebody to take cash, if it's elected to do so. The real estate transaction is different than buying a soda pop at an Amazon store or something like that. But one of the things is that I think even to this day, if you talk to operators, there's always that group of customers that pay for this business in cash, and there will always be operators who will serve them.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I've seen some great solutions with something called a reverse ATM that can issue a debit card for cash. And we've just seen sort of creative solutions for tenants that want to pay by cash, but it's an unmanned facility of having to go down to the local convenience store and transfer the cash for a debit card or something like that. But it's something
it would be very challenging, I think, within the self-storage context to do that. I can sort of see it within a retail where you have a lot of turnover.
Right. We just want you to be thinking about, based upon the demographics of where you are and the fact that you may be an unmanned facility and therefore nobody to accept cash. How do you handle that transaction? I can tell you there's certain kiosks that are out there that accept cash payments, like an ATM. So they understand that stress point of moving to complete electronic transactions as compared to cash. It's just one more issue out there that you have to think about. And I like the way you said it, Carlos, is if you need to think about these issues, if you're moving to an unmanned property, you need to think about these issues of customer service, how you're going to handle transactions, how you're going to handle the election of insurance or protection, all remotely, all virtually, without a manager being there with a tenant. And, I know there's a debate in the industry about the success of unmanned versus managed. There's lots of management companies out there that believe managers should be on the property. There's a lot of companies out there now that are offering these technology advancements to allow for unmanned facilities. The decision of what works for you as an operator, certainly up to you. So, all right, so let's go to the big reveal here about
online rental.
Yeah. So, hey, Carlos, go ahead. What led us to the world of online rentals for self-storage?
Yeah, the starting point is that online transactions, online contracting, which online rental, online leasing is part of, is been around for a long time. We've been contracting online probably over a decade now. And the one thing to keep in mind is that there is a statutory and a judicial framework that makes this work pretty well. But you do have to realize that there's the federal e-sign law, and probably more important that we have a uniform state laws. And we always have problems with uniform state laws because invariably states like to go their own way, but every state recognizes the concept of online rentals, online contracting. So again, that in and of itself is not going to be a problem. You do have to think in terms of making sure that you comply with the requirements of online rental. And
that's the next slide. Yes, let's turn to the next slide. So,
okay, but,
yes, there you go, legality.
Yeah, so that you do comply with the overall legal framework of this contracting process, and just to always keep in mind that the most important document in your self-storage, in the self-storage business, is that rental agreement. And if there's probably one rule that you want to have from a legal perspective is nobody puts property in a space unless they've completely executed our rental agreement. because having property and storage units without a rental agreement, it seems like that is the one person who is the troublesome tenant when that happens. And it does happen from time to time. But you want a system that makes it very difficult for the person to go to access a storage unit, put property in a storage unit until you have in your system a completed rental agreement. And so be very careful about how you set that up. And the other thing you might want to ask yourself, and this is sort of an operational question, just because I can rent a space at 3 a.m. in the morning, do I want people bringing property onto my facility at 3 a.m. in the morning? Because those things are not necessarily the same. The world is a different place at 3 a.m. in the morning than it is at 7 a.m. in the morning. And if you want to have hours of operation for your gate, that's a completely different question. You don't have to allow people coming in at all hours of the day or night. You can put reasonable restrictions on those kind of things. But making sure you get that, the documentation. The other thing you want to think about is what kind of information do I want from the tenant? Well, one thing you're going to hopefully get from everybody will be financial information in the form of a credit card or a debit card, because that's extremely useful from not just a payment standpoint, but it also tells you something about the person. The question is, do you want other information? Do you want a driver's license? Technology exists where you can get a photo of the driver's license very easily, or you can swipe that electronic strip on the card and get information about that customer. So because you may want some identity aspects of it. The history of the industry has been one where we don't ask a lot of our customers. We don't take security deposits. The industry tends not to do any kind of background check in the form of credit checks or other background checks. It's truly egalitarian. It takes everybody with a pulse almost, not quite, but close. And that has its own issues that you might want to think about if you don't have an office, you don't have a staff at the facility. You any thoughts on some of these issues, Scott?
Yeah, and let's go to the next slide. I mean, the one thing I wanted to talk about that goes with what you just said is really one of the most important things is to me the central document of operation for a self-storage operator is the rental agreement. I mean, I think from our perspective, I mean, I hate to think of this only as lawyers, but you know, when I get a call from an operator who's had a problem, the first thing I ask for is a copy of the rental agreement, because it all comes down to what were the terms and conditions of the agreement between the tenant and the landlord that set the boundaries for what your rights and responsibilities are in that relationship. The thing that's interesting about self-storage, and maybe we should sort of back up and talk about this again before we delve really into the leases, is just the fact that it's a crazy, wild industry, because you have 50 states with 50 separate laws for self-storage. There is not one model law that applies to all facilities. There's no federal law that applies to self-storage operation for 50 states. You've got this wacky world of 50 separate laws. And if you are operating on the border of one state and 10 feet into the next state, your rental agreements may be different based upon those states, likely are different. And what's even more interesting is the laws change or could change or maybe have changed annually. The law is an ever-evolving monster, and for the most part, thanks to guys like Carlos who have worked with the National Association for decades and the lobby groups that work with the National Association, the laws have changed for the better for self-storage operators, but sometimes crazy, weird provisions get in, and you may have documents that are well outdated and they're not current. I mean, so Carlos, admit to us the reality of the ever-changing laws in self-storage.
I would, and most of the changes to the law are actually promoted by the industry, and a lot of it has been to bring the laws up to date. with respect to certain aspects. Obviously, most of it deals with the lien process. The lien remedy, I do remember that David Dahl at Public Storage said that was the most important development in the history of the industry, that we have these lien laws in 50 states. It really has changed the dynamic of the industry in many ways, and probably for the better. And one of the things the SSA, Self-Storage Association, is doing is trying to move them forward, allowing notice by email, allowing reducing the presence of the Publishers Association. But these changes do require you to adapt and to stay to stay on top of what's taking place in your state. And again, changes probably don't happen every year, but every 2 or 3 years, there may be a change that requires you to make a modification to your rental agreement or something like that, or your lien process. So you do have to be careful. I wanted to touch on one item that before we leave this section, and that is locks. For 35 years, there was a model in this industry, and that is tenants lock on hasp. 15 some years ago, that started to change with the and one was the inset lock, which was primarily a security adaptation, better security, harder to just cut with a bolt cutter or something like that. Lock technology is moving rapidly, and it's changing every day, it seems like. And one of the things that this change in how spaces are secured, you can do it with a phone, you can do it in so many ways, is that it may require that lock provision in the self-storage rental agreement to be modified. And also the rental process. There may be a way the tenant is when they rent the space, they're given a code that gives them access to their storage unit. So things are different. It's not just a lock on a hasp. And I'm using this as an example. There are other things that this technology will require you to address in the rental agreement. But the way we deal with locks is it's simple, and it's one where the technology has been moving forward at a pretty rapid clip now. And as you look at newer facilities, you can you can go through the gate and open your space with a telephone.
And that's a really good point. And I think that sort of all leads us to this recognition that your operations need to, or I should say your rental agreement needs to match your operations. So just like you're saying, if you've moved to a Bluetooth locking system and you're working off of a rental agreement that addresses locks as the old tenant brings their own lock and locks the door, you've got to update your rental agreement. You've got to change your operations based upon that. And that's a perfect example of the ever-evolving, updating nature of the rental agreement. So we sort of, Carlos and I, recognized this gap in knowledge and access to good rental agreements as we've worked in the industry for decades. And when we saw operators struggling to find a solution to a current legislatively updated rental agreement with the standard terms and conditions, we reached out to the storage group to come together with a plan to create a program, which led to the Storage Lease Now option. Let's go to the next slide. We'll talk about just the value proposition of updated online leases for operators. Whether they use Storage Lease Now or get a lease from a lawyer that they know, as compared to, and what we've seen over the years, cobbling together their own lease from neighboring facilities to something they create themselves. Gone are the days where operators should be basically drafting their own leases. I think you'd agree with that, Carlos.
Yeah, I think the first item on this is, compliance with state, and local laws. I mean, the compliance with the state lien law it's probably the only statute in your state that says, something like self-service storage facility in it. Making sure your rental agreement conforms to that is, that's kind of a non-negotiable issue when you're in this business. And that's sort of the starting point in my mind. And as you've said before, you always kind of start with the rental agreement when you're dealing with these things. And really the rental agreement just reflects how you're doing business.
This next issue about privacy and data security goes to a question we just received in the chat about whether we would ask for a social security number, or would that be a liability for the facility? And I know that's been a significant amount of debate in the industry as to getting the social security number, not getting the social security number. I'll give you my answer to it. I think I've moved away from having that as a field in a standard rental agreement, because we never found that operators used that information for what I would have hoped for, either verification of identity of the tenant. As Carlos said, sometimes whoever can pay the money for the rent is allowed to rent a space. So you're not really being discernible about who your tenant is, so to speak, and requiring a social security number. And I really don't see operators chasing debt and using the social security number to then recover unpaid rent post-lien. They'll write off most of that debt. Fortunately, that debt's relatively low. They haven't let that debt accrue that much, so that there's not really a large amount owed, which would require a social security number to track the person's credit reporting status to be able to report that debt. So I haven't seen it in that area. The only area I've seen it where I ask for social security numbers is if a tenant designates themselves as active duty with the military for compliance with the Service Members Civil Relief Act. And I, for operationally, recommend using an addendum for a tenant who so declares that status, and provide on their addendum sheet their social security numbers for verification purposes, as well as information concerning their commanding officer, family members, and alternative location information for them, since many times they're unreachable if they've taken on that status. And then that information, last thing I'll say on that, needs to be secured. I mean, there is a violation risk of someone stealing social security numbers. So if you take social security numbers, you're going to have to secure that data as much as possible. Carlos, thoughts on social security numbers?
I think you're spot on. I think it's exactly right. They don't tend to get used for collection purposes that often in this business. And the one exception is the military, because if you have that social security number, it gives you the ability to do certain kinds of checks in terms of actual current status, military status, that kind of thing. I think the greater question of privacy, again, with the idea of automated facility, it's being run on a laptop, it's being run on a phone. Have you given, the one word in the modern era isn't plastics, it's encryption. If you're going to be having data on mobile devices, that data should be encrypted. Because these items do get stolen from time to time, they get lost from time to time. And if you've got, credit card information that is accessible, or just even name, address, zip codes, those kind of things, you have to be a little sensitive to that. And the one thing that encryption does for you is it gives you a lot of protection under one of the laws that you have to comply with if there is a data breach. And that if you have encrypted data and the access, the encryption key has not been compromised, you are relieved of a number of the notification responsibilities under most of the state laws that govern privacy of this nature. So again, what we're doing is we're moving our business to paper files that might have been in a locked cabinet, and they're moving towards laptop computers, iPads, and telephones. And the potential for loss is greater, so the need for protection is greater as well.
All excellent points. Let's move on to protection requirements. Clear. We have a checkbox: clear and comprehensive lease agreement. Of course, protection requirements. I want to talk about the fact that so much of our language in the rental agreement is to clarify the non-bailment status of a self-storage operator, not taking care, custody, and control of the tenant's goods, not liable for loss or damage to the tenant's goods because of that non-bailment status, shifting the risk of loss to the tenant's goods to insurance or protection programs. That sort of protection language for you as an operator is essential, that it be articulated properly and in compliance with the law. And I'll even add to that, and again, through efforts of Carlos and the National Association to change laws that uphold valuation limitations in contracts, financial value of the property stored, all are out there for protections for operators in the self-storage business to reduce their liability. So why would we work so hard to create these protections and then have you not put them in your rental agreements? So Carlos, thoughts on the protection issues?
Yeah, I think the bailment issue is an interesting one, and it's hard to find a rental agreement that does not say that the operator, does not have care, custody, and control. We also have statutory language again in the lien statute that sort of defines the relationship between the storage operator and the tenant as landlord and tenant, not bailment. And some of the statutes even include a phrase that the operator does not take care, custody, and control of the tenant's property. So I think the concept of landlord-tenant relationship is pretty stable. We've not had a court go, sort of rogue on that issue in years. But I think that there are a lot of things in the law that you need to take advantage of. And I think one of the most important is the fact that so many states now statutorily authorize the storage operator to limit the value of property. That has proven to be just one of the most effective ways to limit liability, even when a court won't enforce a release of liability, such as where there are allegations of gross negligence. And that's the sort of the typical way that plaintiffs try to get around rental agreements with a release. It still doesn't, if that does not affect a agreement of the tenant not to put value in a storage space in excess of, typically it's around $5,000. So, and that provision is just great. I think it's and the fact that now that it's authorized by statute makes it less likely again that a judge will go off the reservation.
So as we continue to walk through these sort of check the boxes, termination and eviction procedures. So one thing that, and I saw we got a question with regard to if rent is due on the 1st of the month, can the customer be locked out on the 2nd, or does that vary state to state? And I think Carlos and I would both agree that varies state to state in terms of probably consistently would be a definitional acknowledgement that the tenant's default occurs when they don't pay the rent on time. That's tenant's default. But your triggering event to then deny access to the tenant's goods based upon that default vary by state. I was just doing a program for Maine, for example, and they allow denial of access upon default. So it could be day 2. But I know, for example, in Georgia, you have to wait at least 7 days after default before you can deny access. Similarly, in South Carolina, Carlos, California, denial of access.
Well, there's statutory denial of access, and that actually, depending on when you send out what's called the preliminary lien notice, is 14 days after that notice is sent. So it could be 30 days or more. Most operators take advantage of a provision in the lien statute that allows for additional rights, obligations, and duties to be created by virtue of the rental agreement. And they create this right contractually, and it's typically somewhere between 5 and 10 days.
So the last thing I'll mention on this list as we move towards the end, we want to save time for questions and answers, is dispute resolution. I can add the fact that we're getting a lot of discussion about arbitration provisions in self-storage rental agreements for dispute resolution as compared to court process, anxiety about class action risks against self-storage operators, which could be alleviated by the use of arbitration provisions. I'm a big advocate now of arbitration as compared to litigation, unless it's a small claims matter. But that's a facility by facility determination. Smaller operators, I think, may shy away from the need from arbitration provisions. Carlos, thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think if you've got, you're in the vicinity of having, say, 10 facilities in a single state, I would think long and hard about arbitration. I think it's a great idea. If you've got one location, I don't think it matters particularly one way or the other. And in fact, and you can do some of the things in your rental agreement that might have a similar effect by putting a waiver of jury trial provision in the agreement. One of the downsides of arbitration is the right of appeal. It's not as broad as when you're appealing from a court decision. It's much more limited. So if an arbitrator makes a mistake or something you don't like, your options are very limited. If a judge makes a mistake you don't like, you can get a pretty good review of the legal basis on which they made the decision. And that's why I've always been a little bit ambivalent about arbitration when you have one or two facilities in a state.
Let's go to the next to last slide. Just sort of a summary comment about legal counsel. This is not an advertisement for Carlos and I. It's more just the fact that the integration of the law with self-storage is irrefutable. I mean, it's a business that requires a legal compliance element to it, both in your lease agreements and your lien process, and sometimes your day-to-day operational realities come up with legal questions. I mean, it's one of the reasons we created the Self-Storage Legal Network, is for those sort of questions that come up that require legal information regarding an operator's rights. But it certainly led to the creation of Storage Lease Now and the leases that are available to those that are interested in using those leases.
Yeah, Scott, I think this is, a really important point, because I think as we move towards sort of this automated idea, or just online rentals and websites and things, the business is becoming somewhat legally, more complicated. I think in the past you had to be kind of aware of wage and hour issues and staffing and those kind of things. But now you've got to make sure that you've got an ADA compliant website, because the websites are no longer just static advertisements for the facility, but if you can't use the website, you can't access the facility. And so you got to really think through the Americans with Disability Act issues. We're seeing certain types of litigation revolving around websites. So and processes. So it's just a little more complicated in ways as you move to a more technological model of self-storage.
All right, I see some questions in the chat. As we go to the last slide, just put up the information about the storage group and Storage Lease Now. Let me try to address these that are in the chat, and then Ashlee can help us, or Jeannie can help us with other questions that come in. One of the questions: should you offer only $5,000 of insurance or tenant protection if the lease says not to store more than $5,000 worth of goods?
It's an interesting question, but you may have the cart before the horse, and that is that if you want to store more than $5,000, you've got to have insurance for more than $5,000. I don't see a problem with storing, the 5,000 is a bit arbitrary, but it's an amount where probably most customers, don't have to do an addendum each time. But if a tenant needs to store $10,000, you don't necessarily want to say, oh, you can't store here, but you might want, but at some point you might want to have a conversation about insurance. It may not be at 10,000, but it may be at 25,000, where, well, you got to show us that you got insurance on these contents. if you want to go up that high. But a lot of this is, it's not to get in the way of you, running your business in an orderly way and being able to serve your clientele. It's just to create a baseline protection so that you're not, you don't have this unlimited liability without giving some thought to it when you have an interaction with a customer.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. That, I mean, to me, it's a movable number, but I typically use a value addendum. So if they're going to want to store a higher value,
Absolutely.
that addendum would require them to have proof of insurance for the value of the property that's being stored to that extreme value. I guess we're going to turn it over to Ashlee for some live questions.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us. I'm going to attempt to go live with this. I'm hoping that the attendees are able to raise their hand or put something in the Q&A to get some questions and answers for Carlos, Scott, or even myself. So I will give it a minute to see if any more questions come in or if anyone raises their hands. So we'll just hang tight here for a few minutes.
Can we go ahead and answer questions that are in the chat?
Yeah,
yes, please do.
Yeah.
If anyone raises their hand, I'll let you know.
Okay. Here's another question here. I'll give this one to you, Carlos. Is there anything that an operator can do concerning units that fall under bankruptcy, even if they're in lien?
Yes. The first thing you obviously have to do is realize that what we call an automatic stay goes into effect the moment the petition is filed. And what that says is state remedies are on hold. That means you don't go forward with your lien sale. That means you stop sending collection notices. That means you actually stop contacting the tenant directly. Right now, that space and that customer is under the jurisdiction of the bankruptcy court, and you're going to deal with this through the bankruptcy court. Your contact person is generally it will be the trustee in bankruptcy. One of the things you don't want to do is just allow this to simmer and do nothing, because that really isn't in your interest. One of the things that will happen is when you've gotten notice of bankruptcy, you will also get a document where you can file a claim for what you're owed. You can do that, get it in just so that you're on record as having a claim with respect to this customer. But you may be able to get out of the bankruptcy, if there are certain kinds of things in the space, most notably little or no value, and it may be exempt property anyway. You may be able to have a conversation, hard to do oftentimes, with the trustee where they will abandon the property and you can go forward with your sale. If it's property that would be exempt from the bankruptcy and it's of little value, the trustee may not have any interest in it. But again, you have to be careful because you need to get permission to do these things from the trustee or the bankruptcy court.
I see a couple other questions. I don't know, Ashlee, do you see live or do you want me to keep going?
I do have someone that's live. I'm probably going to slaughter their name, but I will try to do my best. And then I'm going to allow you to talk. It's G. Nicatra. So I'm going to unmute you 1 second and let's see if we can hear you. And then
I thought that if I recognize that, that's Glenn, an old friend, and he had a question about integration with SiteLink, and I think maybe the question goes to Storage Group and Click and Store more than it does Storage Lease Now. Let me just explain Storage Lease Now, which is what Carlos and I have worked on with Storage Group. It's a PDF lease after you sort of manipulate it with your logo and your information about your fees and your charges and your unique pricing of your facility would be a PDF document. We did that intentionally, that it was not a Word document, so it could not be wrongfully manipulated by the operator. It's a PDF document. We believe that that's integratable into your software management to spit out the rental agreement. The technicalities of that, I don't think Carlos and I could speak of, but we, defer to the Storage Group folks for answering those sort of questions. But it is a PDF related document.
Right. And as far as the integration to third-party property management systems, yes, Click and Store does. which is an online rental suite, does integrate with the top property management systems. They mentioned SiteLink. That's definitely one of them. And you can find that on our website. It lists all the different property management systems that we integrate with. That way you don't have to track in one or the other. It's all seamless because they speak to each other. As far as we were talking about encrypted and payments, Carlos is talking about that. It keeps it encrypted. You don't go off site. Like sometimes you go and purchase something and it takes you to a site that doesn't look anything like the site you were on. It kind of freaks you out as a user. This is seamless. So it stays within the shell and the look and the feel of your website. So even though they're renting from and talking to your property management software, if you use Click and Store, it's seamless. It looks the same. So there's
one comment on that is keep in mind that the credit card processing companies are under a lot more regulation in this area of keeping this data safe and transmitting it safely than self-storage operators are.
Right. So it is safe. You don't have to worry about that. But that's what's great about it. You're not keeping track of things, the occupancy you have at the site and then online. It all speaks to each other seamlessly. So I don't know, Ashlee, if you had anything else to say about.
Well, I'm hoping.
Let me go on to answer this other question while you guys are looking on for others. Is this coverage plan, a higher coverage plan, this addendum that I've mentioned, that it would increase the value limitation based upon proof of insurance to match the value of the increase on the value limitation, would be my solution to that desire of a tenant to increase from 5,000 to a higher value. The person asking the question goes to the issue of, but what about people's claim for sentimental value? We think a very clear way around that is to have a very specific exclusion and release in the rental agreement that says tenants should not store any property with sentimental or emotional value, collections, anything like that, so that they are not, if they find themselves losing or damaged property like that, it's on their own risk that they have not complied with the terms of the rental agreement. Carlos?
No, I absolutely agree. In fact, that provision, I started using it in response to a California appellate decision that allowed for the recovery of sentimental damages. And it was a bit of a shock because typically that's not permitted with property damage claims. Emotional losses are just not related to property. And it was quite a shock. And that goes back to the 90s. And exactly, a rental agreement provision that prevents, says you can't store property that you have a emotional or sentimental attachment to, and that the storage operator shall not be liable for sentimental or emotional distress type claims. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's been very helpful for the industry over the years.
Ashlee, any other questions out there? We've come to our 3 o'clock hour. I don't know if there's other questions.
Oh yeah, we don't want to take up too much more time.
Yeah, let's take a look here. Looks like I think there's another one coming in. So I'm gonna see if I'm gonna allow Glenn, I believe he has another question for you. He's gonna go live here. So give me 1 second. Let me get him unmuted, allowed to talk. And I think we can hear you.
Thank you. The question I have is
I can't hear.
I can't either.
Can you type it in the Q&A?
Sorry, Glenn.
So much for our live effort.
Yeah,
we tried.
We had a question about the storage of firearms and what do you do about people who want to store firearms? And in some states, firearms are not to be stored in self-storage facilities, one being Arizona. And I think also in Nevada, you can't use the lien on these things. But if you want to prohibit the storage of firearms, you have a right to control the property that goes into your storage space. And while you may be mixed on firearms. You certainly don't want somebody storing ammunition and, other volatile items in the space. So controlling what people store, a lot of people do it in, especially in California, they prohibit it just because it's a pain to dispose of firearms in California because of the laws with respect to guns. Other states, it's not that big a deal.
I'll use this and maybe this sort of funny quip to wrap us up about what people can store and not store. I get a lot of questions about storing cannabis, storing, alcohol, all these sort of things. Just because things are legal, it doesn't mean that they can store them at your facility if you don't want to allow them to. So your use restrictions can exclude firearms, gasoline, propane tanks, other things that are by themselves legal should not be stored at a self-storage facility. So
especially cannabis, because it has a habit of attracting mice and rats. And the cannabis store might be fine, but if it's not stored exactly right, it can be a real problem. It can lead to a real vermin problem.
So,
there you go. That's our quip of the day. That's our cannabis. That's our cannabis close for everybody.
Yeah.
Well, I do have a couple more questions where I had 2 questions come in. It looks like Glenn got a hold of the chat part. I don't know if you can see it, but it says 100% assurance of getting a customer to sign a lease if an office that's comfortable with granting access remotely. If customer does not sign lease, what is the technology to deny the access until signed? That is, unless electronic locks are available.
Don't put a physical overlock on the gate so that they have to contact you because they did not complete the transaction that allows them to be a tenant at your facility. How's that for technology? Put a lock on the gate, put a lock on the door.
Yeah,
that's my answer.
Thank you. That was from Glenn, so I'm glad that he's able to get his question. We do have one more question that I want to make sure we get a hold of from a gentleman named Dan. What about storage of vehicles such as high value bicycles or motorcycles and receiving info on insurance and any financing? How do you deal upon death and bankruptcy? So there's a couple questions in there for you.
Well, yeah, when you're dealing with, vehicles, especially when you get into the RV category and Mercedes, one of the things to keep in mind is that they're a little different than ordinary property in a space. For one thing, insurance is easy for the tenant to provide. You can get physical damage coverage on a vehicle tomorrow if you don't already have it. It's not quite so easy to get insurance on property. So storing these things is fine. One of the things you want to do though is have an addendum for storing of vehicles and making sure that insurance is a requirement, and that if they don't have insurance for the actual cash value of the item. And keep in mind that physical damage coverage of autos is unbelievably broad. It covers pretty much everything except one item, and that's collision, which should not be a problem from your standpoint unless you drive their cars around and things like that. But it's a very broad coverage. It'll cover just about anything that can happen to the vehicle, from theft to whatever. And it will always be, the limit will just be the actual cash value of the item. So it's easy for the tenant to comply, but if they don't comply, then it reverts to the $5,000 limitation. That's how I've handled it. I don't know if you handle it in a different way, Scott.
No, exactly the same way, Carlos. I think that's the way to do it. And I will tell you, just as a sort of a wrap up for other questions that are out there, is Carlos and I have written a number of books, and there's lots of Q&A books out there. All the questions you're asking have already really been answered in a lot of these Q&A materials that are available through the Self-Storage Association. So that's a little plug for the SSA, selfstorage.org. You go to publications and you can find lots of answers to these sort of questions in our materials.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Scott and Carlos. For everyone that's still here, if you do have any questions about storage lease now, click and store, anything about this webinar, my hopes is to get this recording edited, hopefully by the end of next week, but my goal is tomorrow. So I'm hoping I can send that out to everyone. I will also send links to a couple of different things in regards to our the storage group and click and store and storage lease now, because a lot of the questions that we had and a lot of the I don't want to call it the shortfalls of the industry, but the shortfalls of the industry can be covered with our click and store online rental suite and storage lease now. And I will also provide you with the contact information. So if we do have more questions, we can go from there. But I'm really looking forward to, you know, wrapping up with everyone. This was an excellent thing. Thank you so much, Scott and Carlos.
Great information.
Great information.
Very easy to digest, very easy. We just want to thank both of you for just being absolute wonderful partners in everything that we always do together, and such great educators and so easy to understand and such great expertise. Sorry, there's a horrible storm if you hear thunder.
Yeah, so thank you guys so much, and we will do all the follow-up, and we will be sure to connect everyone in if they do have any questions in regards to this. But keep on the lookout for your email with the webinar recording, so you can go back and watch this if you do have any questions, or if you want to maybe even dive a little bit more. We're readily available to help you all out. But thank you so much, and I hope everyone has a great afternoon, and looking forward to doing some more of these. Especially, I really want to do some more with you, Scott and Carlos. You guys have some great information. I even learned stuff. So I truly appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah,
thanks
thank
for
you.
joining us.
Everybody have a great day.
Thanks.